Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. We've got a great episode for you today because I know a lot of you guys that tune into us, you're interested in investing in real estate, or maybe you're interested in helping out investors in real estate, and this episode is geared directly towards that. Because when you're dealing with an investor in real estate, they have an entirely different set of needs than your common retail type of consumer. Now, if you're an investor yourself, you probably already have an idea of some of the things an investor is looking for, but one of the key things, if we think about the main reason why an investor is investing in real estate, why it is that they're taking their time, money, and effort and tying it up in some sort of property, it's to get some sort of return on investment. And now today we're going to be talking and focusing more on apartments and multifamily housing, your commercial types of real estate that are generating income. Yes, there's investors as well that are focused on flipping properties, and that ties a little bit more into the market value. What we're dealing with today is completely different than market value. When an investor looks at an apartment building, when they look at something and they're trying to figure out how much should I pay for this, what they're going to be concerned with is how much money they're going to get back and what return on their investment they're going to be able to get. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is calculating out this return on investment. So really, we're going to kind of look at this of the key things you kind of would be pulling out of a deal. The key things you'd be pulling out of a deal to really start to figure out what this is. And really, the key thing you want to remember is we have this funnel. This funnel is basically going to represent your PGI, your EGI, and your NOI. And now these three different numbers tell you three very different distinct pieces of information. We're going to kind of dive into analyzing these a little bit so you kind of understand what you're looking at when you're seeing these numbers here. Where we're not just talking about the basics of how to calculate NOI, we're talking about what do these numbers mean. How do you translate this to somebody who's maybe new to investing? Maybe you're dealing with somebody who has a lot of money, but maybe they've never invested in real estate before, and they're trying to figure out. Now, this is going to apply even if it's a single-family home that they're trying to get a return on investment for. But typically, if you're dealing with big-time investors, they're not just buying single-family homes. They're looking for multiple units in a single property. So we're going to be talking about a lot of the elements that kind of factor in with that. Now, ultimately, this net operating income, this is the number they're probably going to be concerned with first. So NOI stands for net operating income. So net operating income, that's NOI. And if we break down what each one of these words mean, it's going to really tell us what NOI is. So if we look at this first word here, net. This word net is referring to after expenses, without expenses factored in. When we're dealing with net operating income, we don't want to include the expenses here. Now, it gets a little tricky for what you're going to include in these expenses and what's a legitimate expense, but really what it's going to break down to is almost anything that's not a financing expense. The reason why we're not including financing expenses in net operating income, there's a different number that you would probably calculate those in with, and that's usually called your cash flow, meaning how much money is flowing out of the property, and then you would implement your financing expenses and things like that. But for net operating income, the reason why we don't factor in any sort of financing is because when we're, as a realtor, as a real estate agent, somebody representing a multifamily housing, some sort of commercial property for sale, they want to be able to advertise this net operating income to all investors, not just cash investors, not just investors doing 50% financing or 80% financing or 20% financing. You can see how this is going to definitely vary based on the investors, what they're coming to the table with, how they're coming into this property. So for that reason, we don't factor in financing expenses. We could factor this in after, but that's not part of that net operating income number. And knowing these details of what's included in each one of these levels is really going to help you translate this information for your investor. Or maybe your investor already knows these things, and if you want to work with them, if they want to see you in value, you're going to have to add value to them. So you're going to have some information that maybe they don't already know, or somebody they could trust with the information they do know. But if you don't know that financing expenses are not included in there, that's going to look like a red flag. Like you don't know what NOI is, and that's where they're going to go look for another real estate agent who does understand NOI. So it's very important that you know that this means there's No expenses included in this net income. This is our income after we take out all of our expenses except for financing expenses. So these are going to be things, and what are some of the stuff to look for? Because like I said, we're going to be breaking this down to the things that are going to be your expenses that you need to make sure if you want to double check these income numbers. So we have not operating expenses. Net means not expenses, and not what type of expenses? Not operating. Op, short for operating. So not operating expenses. So our operating expenses, our biggest one is almost always the property taxes. You got to remember you're a partner with the government in any sort of real estate purchase that you're doing. You're teaming up with them when you're investing in property, and they're kind of a silent partner. They just kind of enforce the law and says, all right, here, give us our money to make sure we have police officers and firefighters to serve your place in case it's necessary, and all the other stuff that's available. But yeah, property taxes are going to be a big hit on this net operating income. Other things that could be, let's say we have some sort of maintenance expenses. So this could be the lawn, this could be the pool, this could be repaving the parking lots, this could be repainting the property. Now, a lot of these ones for repainting the property, repaving the streets, maybe setting aside some money. The difference is maintenance would be the actual expenses, but what could also be factored in here, and now this is where you could have some leeway here. So depending on the investor and who's managing this property, and that's really another expense we might have out of this, property management. Because with most investors, they don't want to do it themselves, especially if they're coming to you as a realtor. They're looking to kind of outsource and offload some of this work. They're probably going to have property management expenses, so that's going to be another big expense. But now going back to these unexpected type of expenses, that's going to be called reserves. So reserves are another big part that you want to keep track of and stay mindful of, because this is the number where it's really a lot of it's up for interpretation. This could be an artificially low number or an artificially high number. Typically, it's a little bit lower if they're trying to sell the property, because what these reserves are, this is the money that gets set aside every single month, that's set aside for when a range breaks to replace that, when a refrigerator breaks to replace that, for anything that needs a replacement, that comes out of the reserve. So if you're marketing a property for sale, maybe you're projecting these numbers, you're not going off of actual numbers, and that's definitely something you want to pay attention to, because a lot of times if you're looking at this as an investor to purchase this property, these NOI numbers are already figured out for you. But you got to remember the concept of caveat emptor. Caveat emptor. Got to know your Latin. Caveat emptor means buyer beware. So what do we say when buyer beware? Hey, you're the buyer, you need to be aware of what kind of tricks the seller's going to pull to try to make this look like the best property in the world. Because we have what's called an arm's length transaction. The seller wants the highest price, the buyer wants typically the lowest price. There's these opposing interests. In order for the seller to get the highest price, since the price or value of the property is determined based off of the income, they might try to deflate some of these numbers, especially if it's projections. If these are projected numbers and they're not actual numbers, if they call them pro forma, so if they say they're pro forma, that's basically saying, hey, these are numbers we're making up, that we're projecting. We think this is what this is going to be, but that's where you got to really go through this with a fine-tooth comb and do your due diligence to make sure that everything does check out. To see, okay, let's see if we can do with some of these property taxes and make sure that number's accurate. You usually just pull up the tax records, and that's going to give you a good indicator on what the tax is. It's going to tell you exactly what they are right now. They could be reassessed when the property is sold, especially if the value skyrockets. So that's definitely something you got to be careful about, and it is a little bit unknown with that because it's kind of at the whim of the tax assessor and what they're going to go off with that. But this reserve account, if they're making this super low, you're definitely going to want to have some reserves, because you don't want to be stuck having to replace a range or replacing some sort of fridge, and you got to take that money out of your income, because that's affecting the return on investment. If you're planning for this accordingly, you could set this money aside every single month into a reserve account, and it's just got to be a small portion every single month, but that adds up over time, and then over time you're going to have this bank of money that's set aside, so when you do have to replace one of these items, when you do have to put in new carpeting or do a paint job or anything like that, you have money set aside in reserves. But like I said, this is a lot of time, this is more that pro forma. This is more of a projected type of information for reserves, for replacements. It's not always, it doesn't represent actual expenditures. The actual replacements or the actual maintenance cost for how much it costs, maybe they have a lawn service, and for the lawn service they charge a monthly rate. That's pretty set in, because unless they're leaving and you're bringing somebody else in, that expense really shouldn't change for it there. Now, there could be a lot of other expenses. There could be shared utilities. Shared utilities are a big one. Now, you're dealing with smaller properties, you probably won't see shared utilities quite as much. But when you start looking at larger properties, you're going to see more shared utilities. The shared utilities, these are going to be your lights in the hallways, the things that aren't part of a tenant's particular unit. When you have lights in a hallway, those are going to be shared utilities. When you have parking lot lights, so one of these lights like this right here, these parking lot lights, those, if this is part of the actual parking lot of the building, or maybe a parking garage of the building, or maybe if there's a pool, it costs a fortune to run a pool pump. Those things aren't cheap for the pool pumps, especially if there's a heater involved, if there's all these other things, if there's a community like a clubhouse and there's a gym, especially if they have access to the air conditioners, they're going to be in there in the gym turning that AC down because, they don't want to be sweating too much in the gym. Who knows, maybe they're turning up, who knows, they might even be kicking on the heat. But these are all things that you have to account for, that there's going to be an expense for all of these shared utilities. And this is why when they say doing the due diligence, this is actually, there's a lot more due diligence involved in an income producing property, because it's not so much, because there's a part of it that the investor likes the property, but not as significant as a retail consumer. A retail home buyer, it's all about if they love the property and if they want to live there. For an investor, if they're looking at purchasing this building, they're going to be like, all right, well, let's go ahead and fact check some of this stuff here. Let's get these utility bills. Let's get the rent rolls. Let's see how much money's actually coming in. So these are just some of the expenses you could be looking at. There could be a lot more, but hopefully this enlightens you and says, okay, these are some of the things I have to look for. You have to really kind of walk through the property, especially if you're new to this. If you're brand new to investing in real estate, I urge you not to buy a property sight unseen. You have to kind of walk through the property and spend some time at that property. Don't worry about them saying, oh, don't disturb the tenants. Don't disturb them. Don't go banging on their door or anything like that. But you could be walking through the property, taking a look at it, looking at all these different things. If you're walking through it, maybe you didn't factor in these shared utilities, or maybe these shared utilities, because they're maybe using a pro forma or a projected type of net operating income that they're making up, essentially, that they're, like I said, making up. Maybe they're forgetting about these shared utilities. If this is a vacant building and it's been vacant for several years, maybe they're forgetting that there's these lights in the hallway. And as you're walking through these hallways and you're like, oh, I know these lights aren't metered for the tenant. You could be finding that out. You could be seeing the pool. You see the pool, you definitely want to see dollar signs, because not only is there going to be maintenance for the pool, there's also the cost of running the filter, repairs on the pool. But on the flip side of that, the pool also does represent some dollar signs, because people will be willing to pay a little bit more rent. But then you got to keep that in mind. Okay, with the pool here, do the people living in this complex really want a pool? If we're dealing with something maybe up in the Northeast, I guarantee you this time of year, there's not going to be people out there. I think it's like 30 degrees up in the Northeast right now. They don't have much interest in a pool. Now, if it's an indoor pool, totally different story. Here in Florida, the pools are pretty useful year-round, so that's definitely something that typically adds to our rent value. So these are things that you want to look at, and you really want to comb through this to make sure that nothing's getting left out. To make sure that these things are accounted for, plus whatever else it is that you could think of. And like I said, if you're walking through the property and you're looking around and you're paying attention to the details, you might be able to pick out some of these things. Or maybe the buyer is buying it sight unseen, the investor is buying it sight unseen, and they're trusting you as the real estate agent to go there and walk the property and find out what did they miss when they're figuring out the operating expenses. Which one of these expenses on here is maybe made up, or which one isn't going to be accurate. So you really got to dig through that stuff to make sure you're not forgetting anything. And that's our net operating income. We're going to go ahead and take a short break here, but when we come back, stay with us. We're going to talk about the effective gross income and the potential gross income and how that could enlighten you in a real estate investment. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Ask the Instructor. When you look back on your real estate career, you'll remember the moment you decided to begin this journey. The moment when you finally decided it was time for change. The moment when you decided it was time to take charge. The moment that changed the direction of your life forever. Now is that moment. Need help preparing for your exam? We've got you covered. Join us for a structured weekend review class where we'll cover the topics you need to know to pass your class and state exams. Class sizes are limited, so reserve your seat now by calling 813-928-0106 or registering online at tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Have you been thinking about starting a real estate career but are struggling to find the time to go back to school? Allow us to introduce our revolutionary online course platform. At the Tampa School of Real Estate, we have used our years of education experience and student feedback to bring you the finest and best online course. Visit tampaschoolofrealestate.com, that's tampaschoolofrealestate.com, or call us at 813-928-0106, that's 813-928-0106 to learn more and register for our online course today. After the show, be sure to visit tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Again, that's tampaschoolofrealestate.com, where you'll find all the information you need to start your career in real estate. Also, be sure to check out our Success Center, where you'll find helpful tips for building a successful real estate career. Hey, if you liked the show today, be sure to hit like and subscribe and post your comments. Thanks so much for watching. Hey, welcome back to Ask the Instructor. Every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time, we come to you to help you understand real estate concepts. This is our more technical show we do on every Wednesday at 12 noon. It might help you preparing for the exam. It might help you if you're preparing to deal with an investor who's going to want to know some more of these intricate numbers, because today we're talking about determining value of an investment property, some sort of multifamily property, some sort of apartment complex. It could be a duplex, it could be a quadplex, it could be a 1,000 unit massive apartment complex. These apply really across the board. The numbers are going to be different. The numbers are going to get bigger the bigger the property gets here. We might have more expenses factored in. The property management kicks in more where we have a larger expensive property management, but that percentage amount goes down typically when it's a larger property that you're dealing with. You have maintenance expenses, property taxes, reserve money that's set aside. You have shared utilities. Pretty much anything that's not your financing expense is going to be an operating expense. And it's your job, whether you're an investor or you're a representative of an investor, you're a realtor that's helping out an investor, you need to be able to dive into these numbers here and make sure that they're accurate, to fact check them, to do the due diligence, whether it's for your own investment or an investment that you're being an advisor on. So we talked about net operating income, and this is usually the number that's looked at first. But these two numbers above it, the PGI and the EGI, these are really enlightening as well for a property. So let's talk about our PGI first. So our PGI stands for potential gross income. So PGI is potential gross income. And again, the words here are really going to enlighten us on what it means. Not only are these numbers going to be enlightening for understanding the property better, if we break this down, not just PGI, but potential gross income. Well, we're still dealing with income. All three of these levels, we're dealing with income, income, income. We talked about net operating income, and that's going to be an income that's a net number. Anytime you see net in any sort of accounting, that means that expenses are not included. So net means not expenses. Gross, on the other hand, we see these G's here, gross and gross, G and G. Gross means the expenses are still in this number. That means PGI has expenses included. We haven't taken out any expenses yet. So the income number here, it's a gross income. The term gross, to you as an investor, seeing this number and seeing that number and seeing how much number this drops off to get down to NOI from PGI, that's gross, because this, we didn't take out our expenses yet. Net is not expenses. Gross is gross because the expenses are still factored in. We don't care. That's how much money we could be making in a perfect world where we didn't have expenses. And that's just gross to think about. So gross means the expenses are included in. Now this next word here of potential. So potential gross income, this is how much the property has the potential to generate. So let's do a little bit more complex example here with the property. Let's say we're looking at a property that has a combination of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. And yes, this is the stuff you want to look at here because you don't want to take any of these numbers for granted. Even if we're not using pro forma projected numbers, which unless you're dealing with a vacant property, hopefully you're not, because the pro formula numbers, you can just kind of throw those out because they're just really, like I said, making them up. Yeah, maybe somebody has experience when they're coming up with them, but you definitely need to be aware of pro forma projected type of expenses and incomes. That's essentially what we're doing with the PGI, but again, you do want to understand what this means. So this is how much potential the property can generate. How much potential out of all the units. So we have 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedrooms, let's say, in this property. Let's say that there's 51 bedrooms. There are, let's say there's 32 bedrooms, and let's say there's 23 bedrooms. So we're dealing with a 100-unit property. Not too large in terms of the larger apartment complexes and whatnot, but now what are we doing here to figure out what's potentially grossing? Well, you usually have an average rent. The rents for the 1 bedroom might be all completely the same. And if that's the case, if you're looking at this where every 1 bedroom is completely the same rent, they shouldn't all be completely the same rent. You want to have some different rent levels in there because I guarantee you not all those 1 bedrooms are going to be the same. If we're dealing with a condo tower here, maybe one of these larger towers, you can see right behind there, this is downtown Tampa. We have the Element right over here. Those properties on the top floor, right behind Sky Point, you can't really see it in this one, but the properties on the top floor are going to be worth so much more than the properties on the bottom floor. Dealing with something like this here, if we're dealing with these middle properties, they're usually worth less to a tenant. They'd usually pay more to be on the top floor or the bottom floor because at least on the bottom floor, they don't have to go up any stairs. On the top floor, yeah, they got to go up all those stairs, but number one, they got a lot better view. And then number two, they don't have anybody on top of them. They don't want to have to worry about people banging up on top of them. So usually these ones are going to be worth a little bit more than what's in the middle there. But let's say we're taking an average number just to keep this simple. We could complicate this further, but let's say we're going to keep this simple here. Let's say they rent out an average of about $1,500 a month. So we have 51 bedrooms at $1,500 a month. Let's say we have 2-bedroom properties. We have 32 bedroom properties, and let's say that these 2-bedroom properties, these rent out on average for, let's say, $2,100 a month. And then finally for these 3-bedroom properties, let's say on average for these, they're renting out at about, let's say, $2,900 a month. Now with these numbers already, these are numbers that whenever you see numbers ending in zeros like this, you got to be like, okay, who's making up numbers? I just made up these numbers here. Notice how when I made them up, I didn't say $1,557, which probably would be a more accurate average number for our average rents for these here. So if you're seeing numbers like this that end in zeros, that should be a red flag to you. Right away, you should see these numbers ending in zeros and be like, all right, who's making up numbers on this property? I thought these were legitimate numbers. I didn't know this was pro forma we're dealing with here. Why are there zeros ending in this? And now, obviously, you're probably not telling them this, but you're saying that to yourself. When you're doing your fact-checking or due diligence on this stuff, you should go through all of these numbers. Just don't take for granted what they say. They could be completely cooking the books and making all this stuff up, and you could be thinking you get a great investment, and then you buy the property. Maybe you spend millions of dollars buying this 100-unit property here, and you realize, oh man, they cooked the books. Oh, this was such a bad investment. No, it's not a bad investment. You're a bad investor because you didn't do your due diligence. Warren Buffett, one of the greatest investors known to man, he spends like 80% of his day reading. And he's reading about companies. He's reading about investing things. He's constantly intaking knowledge. And as an investor, that's what you want to do. You don't want to, especially a seller. Maybe if it's your agent telling you this information, that your agent should have your best interest in mind. Not always the case, so you always want to watch them as well. But for a seller, of course, they have a significant conflict of interest to maybe inflate these numbers, make them look a little bit higher, and saying, well, we could potentially generate $1,500 for these units. Well, is that what they're really renting for? So this is why you want to pull those rent rolls, and you want to see what the actual rents, the money's being collected for each one of these. You want to go through and fact check all of this information. But now let's say that these are the actual numbers here. So we have our 3 different types of property here. Now it doesn't really necessarily matter as much for these bedrooms when we're doing the calculations. So what we're going to have here is we're going to take this 1,500 and we're going to multiply across each one of these. So 1,500 times 50, 2,100 times 30, 2,900 times 20. And we'll just do some quick math in here and calculate these all out. So if we have 50 units renting on average for $1,500, that's going to be about $75,000 a month there. These 32 bedroom units, they're renting on average for $2,100. So we take 30 times 2,100. That gives us $63,000. And we have 20 units renting for $2,900. So 20 times 2,900, that gives us $58,000. So we have $75,000, $63,000, and $58,000. So we'll go ahead and add these together. $58,000, $63,000, and $75,000. So we've got a potential gross income that's monthly. Now this number is never monthly. We only have it monthly now because we're going off of monthly rents. We'll have to turn this to annual in a second. So always remember, it seems like we're dealing with a big number here, but this is only what's coming in every month, or what could potentially come in every month. We'll talk about that in a second. $196,000. So this property has the potential to generate $196,000 every month if 100% of the units are rented out and if these numbers are accurate for what the actual rents are. So you want to figure out what this is per month, but then we need to go ahead and multiply this out by 12 to figure out our annual income that's being generated from this property, or potential income that could be generated from the property. So in order to do that, we're just going to take the $196,000, multiply by 12, and we're going to get $2,352,000. So $2,352,000 is going to be our potential gross income for this property. So that's how much this property could potentially generate, $2,352,000. But the key word here is this is just potential gross income. This isn't how much income that's actually coming in. This is just what's potential to come into the property, what we could make in a perfect world where these numbers are accurate and where most likely the deviation occurs where all these units are rented out. But not all the units are always going to be rented out. So now we need to back down from PGI. That's why we're using this funnel here. We're going from potential gross income. We need to bring this down to effective gross income. And in order to figure out effective gross income, we got to subtract out vacancy and collection losses. So yes, the property could potentially generate $2,352,000 per year. So $2,352,000 per year, potentially. But now we need to take out vacancy and collection losses. And what are vacancy and collection losses? Well, this is going to be money we lose due to a property being vacant, or money we lose due to a tenant not paying on time. If we have a tenant in a property and maybe we're in the process of evicting them, they might end up going a couple months where we're losing out on rent down there, but we can't even rent the unit out because they're still stuck in there holding the place up, holding over on their lease or whatever it is that they're doing when they're not supposed to be there. So these vacancy and collection losses, now these are going to be a percentage typically. And now this depends on how in demand this property is. And now my advice for this, because you might hear something about market vacancy and collection losses. Don't concern yourself with market vacancy and collection losses. Market vacancy and collection losses, that's going to be based off of an entire area. This property might be a brand new property. It could be something like this where it's brand new, it looks fantastic, or maybe even this one here. I'm not a fan of brick, but some people like that. So it depends on the particular property. If we have a brand new apartment complex, an apartment development, an apartment tower, whatever it is, that's going to be worth, or going to be more in demand than older apartments. So you got to take that into account as well. And what I recommend doing, again, not using market numbers for this, but actually go in, pull those rent rolls, pull all of the units and see which ones were vacant. Pull last year's numbers. Now, this could change. All these informations can change. You could raise the rent. You could maybe do a better job at leasing it out. Maybe have better management that you put in place. All these things can influence these numbers. But really what you want to do is you want to maybe find worst case scenario and then maybe project into best case scenario. But always go off that worst case scenario and make sure you could still make a good profit on that worst case scenario situation. So, vacancy and collection losses. Let's say it's about, we'll say it's 8%. So let's say we have 8% vacancy and collection losses on this property. And what that means, as far as dealing with a 100-unit property like this, that means 8% of the time. That means basically 8 of the units weren't rented out for an entire year. So that number might be a little bit higher, but who knows? Maybe this is an older property. Maybe it's not as high in demand, so that number could be even higher. You don't want to just take this number for granted. A lot of people get confused by these numbers, and that's why we're doing this show today, so you don't get confused by these numbers, and you'll know how to break these down so you don't have to trust what it is that they're telling you. You don't have to trust them saying, oh, trust us, it's an 8% vacancy and collection loss. That's how you're going to make investment mistakes if you don't do your due diligence and fact check this information. So our 8% vacancy and collection loss now, in order to factor this out, and let's go ahead and free up some space here. Before I take down this funnel, remember we're going from our potential gross income to our effective gross income, potential, how much we could potentially generate, which is $2,352,000, down to our effective gross income, how much we're effectively or how much we're really actually generating after we take out this vacancy and collection loss over here. And then we're just going to go ahead and take out some expenses that we have as well. So say we're going to take that same $2,352,000, and now we need to go ahead and subtract out our 8% vacancy and collection loss. So we have our $2,352,000. Now, if 8% is vacancy and collection losses, that leaves us with 92% not vacancy and collection losses. So we're going to take this $2,352,000 number and multiply it by 92%. And when we go ahead and put that in our handy dandy calculators, we're going to end up getting times 0.92, 2,163,840. So $2,163,840 is going to be our actual dollar amount after we take out an 8% vacancy and collection loss. But like I said, don't take that number for granted. Make sure that this is a legitimate number that you're dealing with here for this 8%. If this is some sort of illegitimate number that they've just made up, then this number basically means nothing. The whole point of looking at these numbers is to make sure that this investment makes sense. And these numbers mean absolutely nothing if they're fictitious numbers. So you need to verify these numbers. I can't stress that enough. If you take away one thing from this entire episode today, it's verify the information. Make sure you fact check and do your due diligence. You've probably heard that a million times before, and I know it sounds cliche, but it's so important if you want to be a successful investor that's able to maximize your return on investment. Yes, this takes time and effort to actually go through and calculate this all, especially if you're going down right exactly from the rent levels. But this is, again, maybe you're a real estate agent. Maybe you're an investor and you don't want to do all this and you want to have somebody that could advise you on this. Make sure you have a real estate agent that knows how to do this. If you're a real estate agent and you want to tap into investors, knowing how to do this is kind of like just the key foundation. Yes, they expect you to know how to figure this all out, but then they also expect you to find out what's not on here. So maybe you're bringing somebody properties, they're saying, hey, look, I've got a couple properties you may be interested in that I've gone through and done some due diligence and fact checking on. You want to come take a look at these numbers, or I could show you what I've done to go ahead and fact check and do some due diligence on these numbers, and this is what I found that maybe doesn't fit the bill here. If you could show an investor that you could find things that are maybe not factored in on these statements, that really proves your value, and that proves your worth, whatever commission it is that you're trying to charge them for your services. Now, as you see with this number here, we still end in a zero. Anytime you end in a zero, that means that you need to be skeptical. You never want to trust zero. Look at it. It just doesn't look like you could trust it, that number. Never trust zero. You can't divide zero. You can't divide zero. Zero is a weird number. You don't want to trust zero. Not being able to divide with zero is a sign that says, hey, this number, you shouldn't trust it. And you definitely shouldn't trust it here if you see it in the end, especially up here, especially here. Now, when we take out our expenses, let's say we went through and we figured out all the expenses. We figured out the property taxes, the maintenance expenses. We figured out how much is being set aside every year for reserves for replacement. Maybe we figured out how much painting expenses we have. Maybe we figured out pool maintenance. Maybe we went through and figured out all these additional charges, the shared utilities, the garbage removal, all of these different things that need to be done in order for the property to operate. Again, pretty much anything except for our financing expenses. Maybe we took those out of it and we found those to be, let's say, $897,322. Now, I just made up that number, but this number does look a lot more trustworthy because it does seem like a more legitimate number here for our operating expenses. So something like this, it doesn't end in zeros. It's not just a basic estimation. Now, again, that doesn't mean you shouldn't fact check this stuff. You still don't want to trust numbers, any numbers, until you've gone through and verified that these numbers are accurate. But let's say these are our own calculations here, and we go ahead and we know that they're going to be accurate, or we're at least assuming they're going to be somewhat accurate. We're going to take out this $897,322, and that's going to leave us with, so this was our PGI, this was our EGI, or effective gross income, and now this is going to give us our NOI, which our net operating income is going to be $1,266,518. So $1,266,518. That would be our net operating income for this particular property. And now maybe this number, once we've gone through and done this ourselves, maybe this number is completely different than what was on that pro forma statement. Or maybe even if it's not a pro forma statement, you went through and did the calculations and found out somebody did something wrong, whether they're legitimately trying to cook the books or somebody just made a mistake, because you can see how this does get to be some complex math. You definitely want to know how to solve these out to go from potential gross income to effective gross income to net operating income. And when you're able to solve this out like this, it gives you an idea of what the property looks like. That if we have a perfect world where we could rent out every single unit and we do extreme vetting and we basically make this vacancy and collection loss almost nothing, we could potentially generate $2,352,000. But maybe we even raise the rents a little bit. Maybe we're looking at this, and this is why you got to look at the details as well as the big picture, because maybe you look at it and you say, okay, we can maybe raise the rents a little bit. That brings this number up. Then how does that affect everything else? How is that going to affect the changes to the net operating income? Really, if you raise the rents and nothing else is changing with your vacancy and collection losses and expenses, you just add that right to your bottom line here. But now if you think about this more, again, you want to factor through you want to be strategic about this when you're doing things. Maybe you raise the rent. But now raising the rent, yes, you could bring in more money, but maybe that's going to bring down your vacancy and collection losses. Maybe this rent is going to be higher than the market level, and that might drop down your vacancy and collection losses. So you got to keep that in mind. Or maybe you're raising the rent now, you're raising it maybe even into a luxury type of apartment type of area, and maybe that's going to cost a little bit more for our upkeep. Maybe we're doing more replacements and we're upgrading the property more, so that could end up changing our operating expenses. So knowing how to manipulate these numbers here, you could maybe potentially turn a bad investment into a good investment if you have a strategy of how you can make these numbers work out, and you're keeping in mind that worst case scenario situation. So when we come back after this next break, we're actually going to go ahead and talk about how to figure out the value from this now. We figured out how much the property is going to be having an income, how much income we have in the property after all of the expenses, but then how much we should pay for this property. And then we also had to factor in our debt servicing and how much this is going to actually cash flow to us in the end. So stick with us. We'll be right back figuring out the value. I'm John Chrismo. You're watching Ask the Instructor. Don't go anywhere.
When you look back on your real estate career, you'll remember the moment you decided to begin this journey. The moment when you finally decided it was time for change. The moment when you decided it was time to take charge. The moment that changed the direction of your life forever. Now is that moment. Need help preparing for your exam? We've got you covered. Join us for a structured weekend review class where we'll cover the topics you need to know to pass your class and state exams. class sizes are limited, so reserve your seat now by calling 813-928-0106 or registering online at tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Have you been thinking about starting a real estate career but are struggling to find the time to go back to school? Allow us to introduce our revolutionary online course platform. At the Tampa School of Real Estate, we have used our years of education experience and student feedback to bring you the finest and best online course. Visit tampaschoolofrealestate.com. That's tampaschoolofrealestate.com, or call us at 813-928-0106. That's 813-928-0106 to learn more and register for our online course today. After the show, be sure to visit tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Again, that's tampaschoolofrealestate.com, where you'll find all the information you need to start your career in real estate. Also, be sure to check out our Success Center, where you'll find helpful tips for building a successful real estate career.
Hey, if you liked the show today, be sure to hit like and subscribe and post your comments. Thanks so much for watching. Hey, welcome back to Ask the Instructor. Every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time, we bring the show to you to help you understand things that might help you pass your real estate exam. This is definitely something that you're probably going to see on your real estate exam. Maybe not in as much detail as we're covering this here, but this is also going to help you out when you're dealing with investors, when you're trying to figure out, hey, what could this property be potentially worth? We've done most of the work. We figured out and verified and vetted this net operating income to find out that on this property, this 100-unit property with 51 bedrooms, with 32 bedrooms, and with 23 bedrooms, that our net operating income would be $1,266,518, which that's a number you could trust. Looking at that number, seeing something like that, you don't want to trust any number. But seeing something like this, you're like, okay, yeah, there's enough calculations going in here to make this come out to where we have some legitimate numbers here. Remember, the zeros you don't want to trust, so maybe you go back and fact check, especially this potential gross income and this effective gross income, because these do add in zeros, especially this one, since we end in 3 zeros there. That's kind of a red flag, seeing all these zeros, because, all right, well, how does the number come out perfect like that where we have all these zeros here? You want to be skeptical of the zero. But now what we want to do is find out how much we should pay for this property. And in order to do this, what we do is we take our net operating income. So this is going to be based on our net operating income. Because as an investor, if we're trying to figure out a return on investment, that's the number we need to go off of. We need to go off of the net operating income. Yes, it's good to know the potential gross income and the effective gross income, but you don't want to try to figure out the value of the property based on PGI or EGI, because there could be massive expenses that eat away at that. So this is the number we're always going to use, and this is basically where the IRV triangle comes in. The I over R times V triangle. So this IRV triangle is really going to help you out in making sure that you know every formula that you could possibly need using this income capitalization approach to figuring out value. So this IRV triangle, what we're trying to find in this case here is the value. We're looking for the value on a property, so we circle the value, and what we're left with is income divided by rate. So our formula is value is equal to our income divided by our capitalization rate, or our return on investment, how much money the investor is looking to get out of this particular property every single year, what percentage of their cash they want to have on cash return. Again, before we figure out our financing expenses factored in with this here. So what we need to do is take this income now and divide it by our capitalization rate. So now what questions are we asking basically when we're trying to find out the value of this property for an investor? Now this is where investment value is significantly different than market value. Market value is, hey, how much would a buyer pay for this property? And we're just saying, oh, well, they like the property. It's a nice property. It's a good area. Maybe they'll pay $500,000 because that's what other properties are going for. When we're dealing with an investment property like this, the key objective isn't whether they like the property. It's whether they like the return on investment from the property, because that's what they're figuring out here. And let's say the investor says, okay, worst case scenario, I want to make sure that we have at least let's say a 4% capitalization rate, a 4% return on investment. So what we're going to do, it's income divided by rate. We're going to divide this by 4%. We're going to take this $1,266,518, and we're going to divide this by 0.04, and that's going to tell us that what we need to pay for this property is $662,950. So at a 4% capitalization rate, we would be paying $31,662,950. So as long as we don't pay more than that, we can get at least a 4% capitalization rate. But now, just so you understand these numbers a little bit better, and let's say the investor says, or maybe you as the investor says, 4%, that's worst case scenario, but really I don't want a 4%. Really, I'm shooting for at least a 7% return on investment. So now what do we have to buy this at in order to get a 7% capitalization rate, a 7% return on an investment? So again, we're just replacing the 0.04, the 4% with 7%. So we're going to do again $1,266,518 divided by 0.07. And now you can see how this range can be completely spread out there, how we completely open it up just by changing this from 4% to 7%. Going up 3%, that puts us at $18,093,114.30. So that's what we should pay for if we want a 7% return on investment. So that's our range we kind of want to be at, to be somewhere in there. Hey, I'll pay at least $18 million for it, but maybe no more than $31 million. Or maybe you're looking at this here and that you can kind of see, you don't necessarily have to use this to come up with a range of values that you're dealing with here. You can maybe just take, and this is where another formula comes in for this income capitalization approach. We probably shouldn't have erased our income. Let's keep that up here. Our NOI was $1,266,518. So that was our NOI. And that's the real numbers that we figured out. So we're not going to be changing that number. We don't want to go into this and saying, well, if I could get the income a little bit higher, maybe I decrease the expenses, maybe I do something to try to get that income straightened out, or maybe I could decrease the vacancy and collection losses. You got to remember, you're going into this transaction with a lot of what ifs. You have a lot of what ifs going into this transaction. You don't want to add more what ifs because you already have what ifs of what if this vacancy and collection loss number isn't correct? What if we can't raise the rents? What if the property management fees increase? So there's a lot of what ifs. You don't want to add more what ifs to this. You want to take that number that you figured out and you vetted that is an accurate number as it stands right now, but there's already what ifs with that. So you don't want to go into this saying, well, let's see, what if I could get this. It's kind of good to know what maybe that potential would be, what type of growth potential. That's definitely another question, but when it comes down to how much you should pay for the property, that's where you got to keep this in mind. So our other formula here, if we're trying to figure out maybe what return on investment, because maybe they already have the value, they already gave us the value, and we already have vetted the income, so our capitalization rate is going to be, again, just income over value. So we circle what we're looking for, and what we're left with is our formula. So our capitalization rate, in order to figure that out, we take the income level, which is $1,266,518, and we're dividing it by the value. So let's say that on this property, they're already asking, let's say that they're asking $32 million. So we have the income that we've already figured out. We know that that's an accurate number as it stands now. Yes, there's a lot of what ifs, but we don't want to add what ifs to this really. There's already enough what ifs involved where that number could change. And so let's say if they're asking $32 million for this property, you go through here and do some quick division. So $1,266,518 divided by 32 million. Make sure you don't drop any zeros here. And we're going to end up with 0.03957, which, moving that two places over, we have a 3.957 capitalization rate. 3.957 return on investment, which kind of low. Maybe it makes sense for the particular market if it's a very in-demand market. Maybe you know that the rents are low and the rents haven't been raised in years and you're going to plan on raising the rents. But that's something you want to look at there. If you're falling into this territory here, you got to be more sure about these numbers if you're falling to these lower and lower capitalization rates, because that could really cut into your money, especially if you're using financing. Even if you're doing an interest-only loan, that interest could really eat up almost all of this money. So you want to try to get maybe a number that's higher than this. Now, in some areas, this is a good capitalization rate. If you're looking at more in-demand type of areas, this capitalization rate, it could be something that's like, okay, that's good for this area. And that's one thing, but do you really want to compare yourself to the particular area? Do you want to really invest in this piece of property just so you can say you invest in this particular area? Maybe it's an area that's on the rise, but now you're thinking about speculation. The whole thing a lot of people get into these income-producing properties for is they don't want to deal with the speculation aspect. They want to be sure with just a little bit of uncertainty, mostly certain, that this is the income that they could count on. If you're trying to speculate, that completely undoes this kind of sure thing that we have with this income approach here. So that number, that's something that I would be like, all right, I don't know if I could do the deal at $32 million. But now let's say we get this down. Let's say we could get them down to 29 million, and let's say 900,000. So let's say 29,900,000. If we could negotiate that price down, and that's where you got to know what's in these documents, especially if they had something wrong when you're figuring out this income approach. You got to look at that, and I mean, you can't offend somebody with this because maybe they did those numbers, or they think those numbers are right, or maybe they're attached to those numbers. But so you got to kind of go with this. I mean, there's a whole different school of thought, different philosophy altogether with this. But you got to go in there like, hey, look, something didn't line up. You're about to invest $30 million, potentially $32 million if you pay them what they want for the property, and you're like, hey, you said that your vacancy and collection loss was only 5%, but I went through and checked this stuff, and you had an 8% vacancy and collection loss last year. What are you trying to do to me here? I still want to do the deal, but I can't do it at $32 million. It doesn't make sense with not even 4% capitalization rate. So let's say maybe you counteroffer at $29,900. So let's say we take again, we're just doing the same math. The math isn't changing here. It's just the numbers that we're putting into the math that's going to be changing. We're going to take our $1,266,518, divide that now by 29,900,000. And now our capitalization rate, we've bumped that up to 0.04235, which about a 4.2% capitalization rate. So it's definitely better. I mean, it's a lot better, really, when we factor we're paying a little over $2 million less out of pocket. But knowing how to do these calculations here are really going to help you in the negotiations, because if they say, all right, well, we could do 29.9, and you're looking at that, okay, 4.2, yeah, that's better, but, I mean, is it really? We went from 3.9 to 4.2, just a couple of basis points there. It's not that huge of a shift. I mean, when we're talking about $1 million, maybe it is, but just looking at these numbers alone, you got to ask yourself, do you still really want to do this? Is this still at 4.2%? Are you going to be okay with that? That's definitely better if you get it up to 4.2%, because maybe you could raise the rents, maybe you could do some improvements, maybe you could do these other things that's going to help boost this property up and get that number a little bit higher. Because let's say another way to go about this, and this is something I would definitely advise against, especially if you've already done your due diligence. This is maybe projectionary. So this is projectionary for you, if anything. You still got to keep that worst case scenario number in mind. If this holds true, what the worst case scenario is. You might even want to go through this and do some calculations on, okay, hey, what if this income falls down even further? What are we going to be looking at for a return on investment? But let's say, okay, we're planning on raising the rents. Let's say we're going to raise each of the rents $100 times 100 units. So that's going to end up giving us an extra $10,000 a year if we do 100 units at an extra $100 a month. So if we could raise that rent an extra $10,000 a year, we're going to add that up here. That's going to change us to 276. And now let's go off that 29.9 number. Now again, with this, we're being projectionary, so we got to be careful here when we're being projectionary, because we got to ask ourselves the question, okay, if we raise the rents this extra $100, are we going to have a drop in our vacancy and collection losses? With a $1,500 rent, probably not. With an $800 rent, you'd probably have a lot of more vacancy and collection losses, unless you're doing something to make that property worth that extra $100. So let's now take this and do $1,276,518 and divide that up by 29,900,000. And now we're bumped up to, it really didn't even change our number that much. We're 0.04269. So I think we're, which is 4.269. So we're still at a 4.2, but instead of a 4.235, we bumped it up to a 4.269, which you could see how even raising the rent $100, which going from $2,900 to $3,000, $1,500 to $1,600, that's a pretty significant raise in the rent. You might even lose some tenants over that raise in the rent, and you can see how that's just very minimally impacting this. So that's huge. That's huge to understand the concept. It's not a huge difference, that even if you raise the rent. So that's, like I said, you don't want to complicate this with what ifs, because this number, especially if this is last year's numbers that you're going off of and not projections. Because remember, with this year, we're not factoring in speculation too much. The speculation is nice if we can maybe increase the value of the property a little bit, and maybe when we go to sell it, it's going to be worth a little bit more than this $29,900 here. But you want to stay away from the speculative side, because something happens with the real estate market, your speculation goes out the window. Maybe the government rolls out some new program that eases the lending for borrowers, and maybe more people are taking out mortgages. That could be something that significantly impacts the rental market. Maybe you're not able to raise the rents $100. Maybe you're going to struggle just to keep the rents where they're at. So this is where you got to be careful going through all of this and making sure that you're not manipulating these numbers too much. The further you get away from actual numbers, when you have actual rents, when you have actual expenses, when you have the actual vacancy and collection loss for last year, that's going to be pretty indicative of what this year is going to be. Now, you're still speculating a little bit. You're speculating anytime you're looking into the future, but at least you're speculating everything's going to hold standard. Everything's going to be the same, and not too much is going to be the change. Now, when you're speculating, oh yeah, we're going to make so much more money because we're in there, you might. But you got to be careful. You got to keep in mind that worst case scenario. It's okay to speculate and project in the future. Okay, if we do this and this and that, that's going to generate more income. That's going to be more cash flow for us. That'll be better. But you got to go into the transaction. You got to go into the deal with the worst case scenario. Hey, if all else holds right now, and even like I said, worst case scenario, maybe you decrease this number a little bit. Let's say, okay, what are we going to be looking at here if we take a hit? Instead of 266,000, maybe we're going to be 206,000. So maybe we take a hit in our rents because maybe our vacancy and collection losses go up. Maybe we have some expenses that hopefully we're not going to have any additional expenses if we did a good job with our due diligence. But who knows? Maybe those expenses go up. So now out of $206,000, let's do it again off that same $29,900,000. So taking $1,206,518, dividing that out by $29,900. That's going to give us 0.04035. So that's somewhat reassuring. That's reassuring, and why is that reassuring? Because that's telling us that, hey, look, even if we take a huge loss, if we somehow are going to be getting $60,000 less, or even if we raise the rents and we're getting $70,000 less on this property in income year over year, which that's a pretty significant loss, we're still going to be above 4% if we pay $29,900,000. So that's why you got to work these numbers. You got to do these numbers every which way. Find out best case scenario for your speculative to say, okay, well, if we really get lucky, if we hit the lotto on this one, we could raise this all the way up to a 5 or 6% cap. But maybe we didn't get lucky. Maybe the market turns. Maybe something happens. We're going to lose some money. If we lose money, are we still going to be profitable? Is this still a good cap rate in our worst case scenario? Because that's how you want to go into the deal with worst case scenario. Okay, yeah, worst case scenario, it's 4%. Still, if that's the difference between 4 and then 4.2, you got to, again, just ask your question, am I going to make money at 4%? Am I going to make enough money at 4%? Is it going to be worth my time? Or maybe this other deal that I'm looking at, this other deal I'm comparing it to, is this worth it? So that's called the income capitalization approach. And that's mainly what you're using whenever you're doing any sort of investment value. We're trying to find the investment value of an income producing property, or how much you're capitalizing on the income coming into the property. There's a lot that factors into this. I know we went in a lot of detail today. We spent an hour just talking about this concept, working through this one deal, not even in that much detail for looking at the expenses, and we spent over an hour talking about this here. And there's a lot of information to look at there, and that's why real estate can be such a lucrative investment. If you're willing to put in this work and fact check everything and make sure that the numbers do work out, you could have a great investment. But if you're just accepting these numbers for what they are, maybe you're supposed to get a $1.2 million income, but maybe that income, because you didn't do any fact checking, it's not $1.2 million. Maybe it's only $900,000. That cap rate's going to be way less. You're going to take a huge hit if you don't verify and fact check these numbers. And even all the verification and fact checking in the world that you could do, you're still speculating that everything's going to stay the same, which there's nothing saying it's going to stay the same. You don't have guarantees that everything is going to stay the same, that nothing's going to change. You might have some levels of guarantees with this stuff here, but again, there's a lot of speculation still involved. So that's, again, why you want to keep in mind the worst case scenario using these numbers here. And if you know how to work with these numbers, you don't just have to take what the seller's saying for granted. You should be able to do your own due diligence and your own fact checking, whether it's you as an investor doing it or you have a real estate agent that's doing that on your behalf that's helping you prepare for this stuff. So that's all I got for you guys today on figuring out income value on apartments and multifamily properties. Hopefully you've taken some stuff away from this. You could kind of implement some of this stuff. Maybe you're going to go out there now, try to get yourself some investors to work with, show them some of the stuff. But if you're trying to do more of this, if you're trying to figure out more of this stuff, go online, see what you can find already. It's harder to find details of properties like this. If you're dealing with a $30 million property, that stuff's almost always confidential, where you got to go into a letter of intent and all kinds of stuff like that and sign confidentiality agreements just to get this basic information. Not saying there's not ways to get it. There's plenty of ways to get that information, and some of it is out there without the confidentiality agreements, but most of the time, that stuff's kept confidential. But even if it is a confidential property, maybe you're living in some sort of apartment complex, why don't you go through and try to find out what that apartment complex would be potentially worth? Go through, do some calculations, figure this stuff out, understand how to work with these numbers. Because before you start putting your own money on the line, or you're expecting somebody to trust you with their money on the line, you got to know these numbers inside and out. Because these numbers don't lie. They could be incorrect, but they don't lie. So it's kind of you got to think about that a little bit. Yes, these numbers are usually going to be correct. What we're looking at here, if we verified this and fact checked this, but you got to keep in mind that, hey, if this number is incorrect, how's that going to change our capitalization rate? How's that going to affect our return on investment? Does this still make sense at 4.03%? So that's our income approach. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this episode and have taken something away from it. Remember to tune in next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. I want to know what you guys think of this background too. We got a neat little background today with, instead of just the stupid little boxes floating around in there, we got all these nice little apartment buildings to give you guys some eye candy, some goals back there for you to look at as we go through these. So if you guys like that stuff, go ahead and put that in the comments, hit the like button, and let us know, because we're going to do that with our future shows, if you like it. Remember to tune in Friday at 12 noon Eastern Time. We're going to be talking about how to mastermind and grow your real estate business. That's called State of Real Estate. Great show. It's going to help you out a lot, and that information is all available for free. If you're not subscribed to our Success Center, go to tampaschoolofrealestate.com/success. And make sure you subscribe on there, because you get all these videos straight to your email inbox. And even if you miss the live stream, you can go back and watch the recording. And if you watch this live stream and you're still a little bit hazy on this stuff, go back, watch the replay, rewind this stuff over again, and you could rewatch this stuff as many times as you need to. And of course, like I said, let us know if you do find it helpful. That's all I got for you guys this week. I'll see you next week on next week's episode of Ask the Instructor. Thanks for tuning in today.